Hey guys, tonight we descend into the shadowy corridors of castles and cottages where whispers of flesh and fear echo through the cold stone walls of medieval Europe. You're standing barefoot on uneven flagstones, the chill of ancient drafts curling around your ankles. Somewhere in the distance, a flickering torch sputters against damp stone. The air is thick, not just with soot and rot, but with secrets. Heavy secrets. Forbidden secrets. The kind of secrets that, if spoken aloud, could get you burned, banished, or worse. Tonight, we unravel the darkest, most uncomfortable truths about what people really did in the privacy of their chambers, or in many cases, what they were forced to do. From brothels built beside churches, to the horrifying chastity punishments inflicted on women and men alike. From bizarre beliefs about animal lust, to aristocrats who treated marriage like a bloody battlefield. You're about to wade through a world where sex power and superstition collided in a tangle of cruel customs and surreal logic. You probably won't survive this if you're expecting a fairy tale romance, so maybe prepare yourself for a few mental bruises. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where and when you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a peasant's one-room hovel. The walls are plastered with mud and straw, and the bed, if it can be called that, is a pile of burlap sacks and rags. There's no privacy, no candlelight fantasy. The kids, the parents, the livestock, they all share the same space. You try to sleep while a pig grunts behind your head. And at some point in the night, without ceremony, you realize something's happening under the covers. Not whispered love, just function. Procreation, maybe. Habit, possibly. But no one waits for the children to fall asleep. There's nowhere for them to go. You just pretend not to hear. You just learn to ignore it. In this medieval world, sex was both ever-present and hidden. Everyone knew it happened, there were children after all, but no one was supposed to talk about it. Yet ironically, the church couldn't stop talking about it. You hear the voice of a parish priest, hoarse and righteous, listing forbidden positions, forbidden days, forbidden thoughts. Monday through Wednesday, no intercourse. It was too close to Sunday. Thursday and Friday, off limits because of the Lord's Passion. Saturday, a holy vigil. Sunday, are you mad? It's God's day. That left a sliver of approval, maybe Tuesday night, provided you weren't in the mood for anything too enthusiastic. And God help you if you tried anything beyond the missionary position. Oral sex, sodomy, even in marriage, those could land you in a dungeon, a pillory, or worse. You weren't supposed to enjoy it. Sex was a duty, not a pleasure. It was for making more souls for the Lord's flock, not for entertaining yourself in the dark. You walk now into a village square. There's a wooden platform erected beside the well. A woman stands barefoot on the boards, trembling. She's been accused of adultery, or worse, of enticing her husband too frequently. Her punishment, public penance. She's wrapped in a burlap sack and paraded through town, smeared in ash and chicken feathers, her head shaved for shame. You watch as villagers throw spoiled turnips and mutter words like strumpet Jezebel wanton. Her crime desiring pleasure. Medieval law books are full of twisted logic. If a woman was raped in her own home, they'd ask, why didn't she scream loud enough? If she was unmarried and pregnant, she must have seduced someone. And if she was married and barren, it was her fault, obviously a punishment from God. The sexual agency of women was reduced to silence or spectacle, either a sin or a scandal. You duck now into the great hall of a noble estate. It's dark, but the air is thick with perfume and spiced wine. You hear laughter, sharp teasing, and catch glimpses of silk sleeves and jeweled collars. There's music from a single lute, and in the corner a girl no older than 13 tries to avoid the gaze of a baron more than 3 times her age. She's a pawn in a dynastic game, betrothed, before she can read married, before she bleeds. Tonight is her bedding ceremony. Yes, a real thing. The marriage is not considered valid until consummated witnesses often wait outside the room, and in some cases, noble families actually watched the act begin to ensure the union was sealed. You stand behind the thick velvet curtain, your heart pounding not with excitement, but with dread. There's no romance here, just duty, just legacy, just power. Marriage in the Middle Ages wasn't about love. It was a contract, a transaction, an alliance. Sex was part of the paperwork. You had to prove it happened often by displaying bloodied sheets the next morning. And if the bride didn't bleed, her honor could be questioned. Her life could be in danger. Virginity was a currency, a symbol, a myth, and it was often enforced through horrifying means. You reach for a thin leather strap on a table. It's a chastity belt, more folklore than fact, but not entirely fiction. While few were ever worn for long, the threat of them loomed over women's lives. Fathers and husbands could control a woman's body through surveillance and superstition. The belt made of cold iron or leather locked at the pelvis. Sometimes it had metal spikes, and while it was mostly a symbolic threat, or fetishized in later art, the idea reflects how little trust there was. Women were locked away literally and socially from pleasure. You make your way to a monastic scriptorium. The monks are copying illuminated texts. One of them stifles a yawn, his face flushed. He's been up all night wrestling with temptation. Even celibates weren't spared. In fact, monks and priests were subject to more scrutiny and more guilt than anyone. Many flagellated themselves to rid their bodies of desire. Others wore hair shirts, spiked chains, or starved themselves to tame the flesh. But still, the dreams came, the fantasies, the shame. The church taught that the body was a prison, and sex was the crack in the cell wall, a way for the devil to crawl in. You now approach a crowd gathered around a makeshift stage. A traveling troupe of actors is performing a mystery play. The devil appears grinning wildly, tempting villagers with lust and wine. Everyone laughs, but you can sense the tension underneath. The medieval mind saw sex and sin as nearly indistinguishable. Passion led to damnation, and yet the human body didn't care. It yearned. It betrayed. It pulsed and dreamed and reached out in the dark. The darker the rules, the darker the desires. You step inside a brothel now licensed no less. The church condemned prostitution, but also allowed it. Better, they said, to sin with a known harlot than corrupt a good woman. So brothels existed in shadows, and sometimes, quite literally, beside cathedrals. The women who worked there weren't respected, but they were necessary. Some wore veils to shield their shame. Others tattooed their arms so clients could identify them. If a prostitute got pregnant, she might be banished. If she got sick, she might be left to rot. Yet for many, it was the only way to survive. You settle into a corner, heart heavy, watching a girl wrap a faded shawl around her shoulders. She's maybe 16. Her eyes look past you. She's done this before. She's been taught not to feel. This is just the first glimpse into the darkest sexual customs of the medieval world. Not the romanticized gallantry of storybooks, but the raw, brutal, often contradictory realities of what people did and what was done to them in the name of God, honor, or simple survival. The shadows grow deeper, and we're only just beginning. The torchlight flickers again, casting long, swaying shadows against rough-hewn walls. You've moved from the brothel's narrow alleyway into the echoing silence of a castle's lower chamber, a place both sacred and sinister. Here behind closed doors, noble lords and ladies played dangerous games of intimacy. Not passion, no, not always. More often, control, power, reputation. You ease your way into a cramped bedchamber, ducking beneath wooden beams, blackened with centuries of smoke. A woman in fine linen kneels on the rush-covered floor, her eyes downcast. Her lord husband stands over her, a goblet in one hand, a decree in the other. He's found her lacking, whether in beauty, obedience, or fertility, and now seeks an annulment, or worse punishment. Because in noble marriages, failure to produce heirs wasn't just a disappointment. It was a scandal, and the burden almost always fell on her. You listen as the Lord cites frigidity as a reason for complaint. It was a real accusation codified in law. If a woman didn't respond with apparent enthusiasm during intercourse, her husband could denounce her for coldness, claiming she was incapable of the marital act. That could void the marriage, send her home in disgrace, or if she was unlucky, land her in a convent where vows of silence replaced screams of protest. And if a woman did enjoy herself, that was no safer, because pleasure for women was seen as inherently suspicious. Doctors at the time, more philosophers than scientists, believed a woman could not conceive unless she experienced orgasm. So if she got pregnant outside of marriage, they argued it must have been consensual. This logic wasn't just flawed, it was cruel, and it turned victims into sinners. You step into a courtroom now, a rape case. The man, wealthy, armored, flanked by retainers, claims she gave herself freely. The judge asks the woman, "Did you cry out? Did you fight him?" The law demanded resistance, but resistance was complicated, because in many places the use of force invalidated consent, but the absence of injuries suggested willingness. It was a trap. And if the woman was married, her husband could accuse the other man of trespass, like property damaged or borrowed without permission. Her body wasn't hers, it was her husband's possession. You flinch, startled by the clinking of iron. You've wandered into a tavern now. It's late. The air is thick with sweat, ale, and tension. In the corner, a man boasts loudly about his latest conquest, some servant girl from the Lord's estate. She was asking for it, he says, because she smiled, because she didn't run. Around the table, other men nod, laugh, pound their fists. This isn't camaraderie, it's complicity. The concept of consent as we know it didn't exist here. Instead, power determined who spoke, who silenced, who suffered. And in small towns or isolated farms, rumors could carry more weight than truth. A girl accused of lust might be ostracized. A widow showing too much skin, too much being anything above the ankle, could be accused of witchcraft. Her sexuality, even imagined, was dangerous. Now the room around you seems to shrink. You're in a monk's cell again, but this one's different. On the wall, strange diagrams, circles within circles, Latin words surrounded by drawings of naked bodies tangled in flames. These are penitentials, manuals for priests, lists of sins down to the most bizarre and obscure, and their corresponding punishments. You lean in and read aloud, almost whispering, if a man copulates with his wife standing up 2 years penance. If a woman mounts her husband 5 years. If either partner enjoys it too much 7. It goes on and on. Punishments for masturbation, for same-sex encounters, for touching yourself in your sleep. The body was always watching itself, always judged. Even dreams were sinful if you remembered them too vividly. You wonder how many nights were spent in fear, not of death, but of damnation, because the church taught that sexual sin stained the soul more deeply than almost any other transgression. And confession was both a cleansing ritual and a terrifying ordeal. A teenager trembling, trying to explain what they did in the dark alone. A widow crying ashamed that her body still wanted. A priest himself tempted listening and silently punishing himself with every admission. And in some places, punishment wasn't just spiritual. You now arrive in the middle of a town square. A post, a rope, a woman tied to it, gagged. She's been caught in adultery or accused of seducing a married man. Whether it happened or not is irrelevant. What matters is that someone with power decided she should be shamed. You hear the crowd jeering, laughing, throwing filth. She might be beaten, branded, or marched naked through the streets. And the man, he might pay a fine, or nothing at all. Justice was not blind. It stared wide-eyed, with one hand always open for bribes, for blood, for spectacle. Then you hear the clatter of hooves and the sharp bark of hounds. You turn and find yourself near a hunting party returning to the estate. But they're not after deer today. They're after heretics, or witches, or anyone deemed too free, too wild, too sexual. Because sexuality, especially in women, was linked to evil, to nature, to the devil. Witch trials weren't just about magic. They were about fear, fear of women who didn't obey, didn't marry, didn't bear children. And many of the questions asked during those trials, they were about sex. Did the devil touch you? Did he lie with you? Where? How often? How did it feel? Confessions were extracted with firewater ropes. But the obsession with sexual detail never wavered. It wasn't just punishment. It was perverse curiosity cloaked in piety. And for men, deviance was punished too. Homosexuality, called sodomy, was not merely a sin, it was treason against God. Caught in the act, a man could be castrated, burned, banished, or corrected by forced marriage. You now stand at the edge of a field, quiet but for the wind. There's a man hanging from a tree. No placard explains his crime, but the whispers say he was found with another man. They didn't even wait for a trial. The Middle Ages were not kind to desire, especially desire that didn't follow the script man, woman, marriage, child. Anything else was feared. Anything else was hunted. But even within marriage, things could turn grotesque. You step into a chamber again, where a young bride, maybe 15, lies on a stone bed, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. Her husband is older, much older, and drunk. The bedding ceremony looms. Guests wait outside to hear proof. She's been told she must bleed, or else she'll be cast out. She must be silent, or she'll be called a temptress. She must be still, or he'll call her a whore. And so she lies there barely breathing, waiting for it to be over. This wasn't rare. This was ritual. And it wasn't just about sex. It was about lineage, property, bloodlines. A noblewoman's womb was a vault for inheritance. If she failed to deliver a son, she was blamed. If she delivered too soon after marriage, she was accused of cheating. If she miscarried, she was whispered to be cursed. The pressure was suffocating. the consequences deadly. You walk now into a small candle-lit chapel. A couple kneels before a priest. But this isn't a wedding. It's a marriage debt ceremony. She refused him last night. She was tired, ill, afraid. He brought her here to remind her a wife cannot deny her husband. The priest quotes scripture, reminds her of duty, of obedience. There is no consent here, just obligation. The church sanctioned marital rape, encouraged it even. After all, a man's urges were natural, a woman's reluctance a sin. And this was not considered cruelty. This was love. This was normal. As you step out into the night again, the wind biting against your skin, you realize the horror wasn't just in the acts themselves, but in how ordinary they were, how accepted, how institutionalized. No monsters, no shadows, just people, living by rules that made cruelty legal and pleasure punishable. And we're still just getting started. The road before you narrows, winding away from the heavy gates of the town and into the pastoral quiet of the countryside. But don't let the silence fool you. Behind thatched roofs and beneath tidy layers of peasant modesty lurked a world just as twisted as anything behind castle walls. You walk slowly past cottage doors, half hung on wooden frames. Inside, whole families sleep in one bed, not out of affection, but necessity. And within those overcrowded rooms, boundaries blur easily, too easily. You settle into the farthest corner of a peasant home where the roof sags from years of smoke curling through the rafters. There's no chimney, no privacy, no separation between siblings, parents, or livestock. You pull your rough wool blanket higher and pretend not to hear what happens in the dark. A father touching a daughter. A brother older by too many years shifting too close. The truth is ugly, but it's also documented. Manorial court records tell us stories too grim to romanticize. Incest wasn't just a rumor, it was a known risk in isolated villages, where neighbors were few and family ties inescapable. Cases surface again and again, a mother charged with seducing her son, an uncle found in bed with his niece. The church condemned it fiercely, but legal punishments were inconsistent. In some places, the offending man might be whipped or fined. In others, he might simply confess and carry on. The woman almost always blamed, branded as temptress or witch, banished, silenced. And so you move on your footsteps, crunching over frost-hardened grass. You find yourself drawn toward a barn warm with the heat of animals. But here, too, the lines between sacred and profane blur into horror. Because medieval people caught in cycles of superstition, ignorance, and desperation believed things you can barely stomach. Bestiality. It wasn't just taboo, it was treated as a cosmic threat. The union of human and beast, they said, offended the natural order and endangered all society. And yet court records across Europe mention it often enough to raise uneasy questions. Were these confessions coerced? Or was something darker and more common hiding in plain sight? You step into the memory of a French trial circa 1386. A man is accused of violating a sow. She's pregnant. He confesses. Whether through pressure or guilt, no one knows. But what happens next is chilling. Both the man and the animal are sentenced to death. The man is hanged. The pig is dressed in a human shirt and skirt, paraded before the town, and then executed sometimes by burning, sometimes by hanging from a gallows built for two. Why? Because medieval minds saw sexual sin as contagious. If one man did it, surely others might. If one sow was violated, the whole sty could be suspect. Punishment wasn't just about justice. It was about spectacle and purification. And the idea of animals being seductive or tempting wasn't uncommon. Some theologians warned that a goat's eyes held demonic charm, that cats were witches' familiars not only cursed, but complicit. Lust was so feared, so demonized, that it was projected onto anything and everything, even animals. You leave the barn quickly unsettled, stepping now into a midsummer fair. It seems joyful at first. There's music ale, brightly colored ribbons strung between poles. But behind a row of stalls, you hear a different kind of performance. A puppet show. Except this one is grotesque. It mocks women for their desires. It portrays priests as bumbling perverts. The crowd laughs, but not kindly. The jokes are cruel, ugly, too real. Satirical plays and songs were how people processed the shame surrounding sex. They made fun of cuckolds men whose wives cheated. They laughed at impotent husbands, at lustful nuns, at young wives tricked into marrying old men. Behind the humor was resentment, rage, longing. You spot a jester with painted cheeks and jangling bells. His song, a rhyme about a woman so promiscuous her chamber pot had more visitors than a tavern. The men roar with laughter. A few women chuckle politely, heads down. But you see it. The flicker of humiliation in their eyes. You wander further until the music fades. And now you find yourself outside the walls of a convent. Ah, yes, the convent. A refuge, perhaps, but not always. For some women, it was a sanctuary from marriage, pregnancy, the endless grind of childbearing. For others, it was a prison dressed in linen and prayer. And within those stone walls, sex did not simply vanish. It twisted. It found new forms. You slip through the cloister past candle-lit corridors and sleeping sisters. In the scriptorium, you find a diary hidden in the back of a prayer book. The ink is faded, but the words are alive with longing. One nun writes of her sister's soft hands, her breath like incense. Another writes of a priest who visited weekly and what he made her do in the sacristy. Forbidden, punishable, but also her only taste of touch. Historians have uncovered confessions, accusations, and even love letters passed between nuns. Some were punished severely, flagellated, starved, imprisoned. Others simply disappeared from records, moved, erased. And those who lived through it. Their stories are shadows in the margins of manuscripts, invisible unless you know where to look. You trace your fingers across the stones of the cloister wall and step back into the village. Here, another form of sexual darkness lurks, one disguised as protection. The medieval world was obsessed with virginity. A woman's worth, her social status, her marriage prospects, her family honor, could hinge on the presence or absence of a hymen. And so tests were devised. Rituals, examinations. You watch as a young woman is led into a chamber by her mother, a midwife, and 2 female witnesses. She's to be inspected, literally. Her virginity must be confirmed before her wedding day. If she's too loose, too silent, or simply looks ashamed, she might be accused of deflowering herself or being seduced. The test is neither scientific nor fair. It's based on superstition and assumption. And if she fails, the wedding could be called off, her dowry lost, her family disgraced. In some places, if the husband was wealthy enough, he could demand compensation. Or worse, he could drag her before a judge to annul the marriage on the grounds of deceit. Virginity wasn't just a social expectation. It was currency. And sometimes it was staged. You walk now into the bedroom of a bride on her wedding night. She's terrified. Her new husband expects proof of her virtue. But she's been here before. She was attacked last year. No one believed her. Now she uses sheep's blood hidden in a cloth packet to stain the sheets. A desperate trick for a cruel world. Her life may depend on it. You turn now to another kind of desperation contraception. Because for all their prohibitions, medieval people still tried to avoid pregnancy. Not out of libertine impulse, but from fear. Too many mouths to feed. Too many babies lost. Too many women dead from childbirth. Midwives whispered recipes, some deadly. Pennyroyal rue tansy. Herbs that could stop a pregnancy or a heart. Women drank them in silence, hoping the dose was just right. Others used amulets, prayers, charms, tied bones under their skirts or chanted spells to saints. Nothing guaranteed. Everything dangerous, and abortion officially condemned by the church. But it happened. Often. Discreetly. Or with help from women who knew things they were never supposed to speak aloud. It was called restoring the menses or expelling the moon. A woman might disappear for a few days, return weaker, paler, and everyone would pretend not to notice. You pass a grave now, unmarked, a small stone by the edge of a chapel. They say she bled out after the root tea, or maybe the midwife waited too long. No one writes her name, and finally you find yourself standing at the foot of a gallows again. A man swings above you, his crime lust. Not for women, but for men. He was caught in the act. No trial, no mercy. They hanged him at dawn, and the priest said nothing over his grave. But you know now that the Middle Ages were not silent about sex. They were obsessed with it, drenched in it, twisted by it. Rules upon rules, secrets buried beneath shame, punishment, and prayer. The darker it was, the more they feared it, and the more they feared it, the more it thrived. The gallows fades behind you, swinging like a slow pendulum in the wind. You leave the crowd behind their backs, already turned, their whispers, already shifting toward supper or sin. Your path winds down into a narrow street, a place where stories stick to the walls like soot. Here, the world of love and lust isn't about courtship or poetry. It's about transaction, about business. You step into the humid dark of a bathhouse. In the Middle Ages, bathhouses weren't just places to get clean. They were social hubs, neutral zones where townsfolk, rich or poor, could soak away the grime of labor and pretend for a few hours to belong to a gentler world. But of course, they weren't just for bathing. You see it in the sly glances exchanged through steam, in the way the curtains don't quite close all the way. Many bathhouses offered more than hot water. Some openly doubled as brothels, with bathing used as foreplay and cleanliness as a false promise of purity. Here, flesh is a commodity, but also a performance, a ritual. A young girl walks past you, no more than 17. Her face is powdered, her hair wrapped in silk. She offers a smile that doesn't reach her eyes. She's been doing this for years, and though the church railed against bathhouses, they never shut them down completely. Why? Because even priests visited, even monks. Lust was a sin, yes, but also inevitable. And in that logic, indulgence became part of human weakness. A weakness to be managed, not cured. So bathhouses stayed open. In cities like Paris, London, Florence, they thrived. Some were state-regulated, others entirely underground. The ones that were licensed had rules: no sex on Sundays, no girls under a certain age, no clients with visible disease. But those rules were ignored often enough that entire districts became notorious for what happened in the steam. You duck out of the bathhouse and wander through a covered alley where vendors shout about their wares: eels, onions, fabrics, ointments. And then more quietly, love potions. You lean in. The woman behind the stall has a dozen tiny glass vials, each filled with something different: crushed rose petals and goat blood, honey and ash, powdered bone if you know who to ask. She offers you one with a knowing smile. To make him want you, she whispers. Or to make her forget she ever said no. These were real, not just superstition, but marketable. Love potions, aphrodisiacs, poisons disguised as pleasure. Women were particularly vulnerable to these transactions, not just as users, but as victims. A man might slip something into a cup. A rival might send one to sabotage a marriage. Some concoctions caused hallucinations. Others triggered miscarriage. And many were deadly in the wrong dose. You pocket the vial just to look. It smells of rosemary and something metallic. Now you pass a house with thick wooden shutters. Inside you hear something rhythmic. No laughter. No music. Just a woman counting quietly under her breath. You peek inside. She's a midwife, but also an enforcer of sorts. She keeps the village's unspoken order. She helps deliver babies, but also ends pregnancies. She prepares girls for marriage and for nights they don't understand. She keeps a ledger of who visits her when and why. She knows everything. And so when a girl is raped by the landlord's son and her belly begins to swell, she comes here. Not for justice, for silence. The midwife doesn't judge. She simply boils the herbs and closes the shutters. In a world where women had no legal protection, no voice in court, and no control over their fate, women like her were the only recourse. But even she cannot stop what happens next. Because in another house across the village, a different midwife is being dragged out by her hair, accused of witchcraft. They found dried toadstools in her cupboard, saw her speaking to a cat, heard that she helped a girl miscarry. Whether it's true or not doesn't matter. She'll be tried, and she'll be found guilty. You follow the crowd as they drag her to the square. She's tied to a post, wood piled at her feet. A priest shouts about temptation, about the devil's agents in skirts, about how Satan uses women to corrupt men's souls through the doorway of lust. Then fire. You step back from the heat, heart sick. This wasn't about magic. This was about sex, about shame, about punishing women for knowing too much, wanting too much, or simply not being afraid. You walk now through a university courtyard, an elite space of learning. Here scholars debate theology, medicine, law, and sex. Oh yes, always sex. They write volumes on the nature of women, how cold humors make them fickle, how their wombs wander if unsatisfied, how their desires are dangerous and must be tamed. One professor lectures on Aristotle, then pivots into a diatribe about female insatiability. He claims women are more lustful than men, which is why they must be controlled, why they must be married off young, why they must be silenced when they speak of their needs. Another scholar writes that too much sex will shrink a man's genitals and weaken his soul, that frequent emission causes insanity, that it drains the body's essential spirit. You'd laugh if it weren't taken so seriously. This is how science reinforced shame. You open a manuscript in the library illustrated by hand. It depicts a couple in bed. The woman rides the man. A demon watches from the corner grinning. A caption beneath reads, "The devil delights in unnatural congress." That's all it took. A drawing, a rumor, a whisper, and you find yourself once more at the feet of the church. A great cathedral rises in front of you, its spires slicing the clouds. You step inside. Candles flicker in every alcove. Saints gaze down with wide eyes and wooden smiles. And in the confessional's dark curtained boxes, you hear secrets spill like ink. A woman confesses that she's touched herself. A man admits he looked at a servant too long. A teenager shaking says he dreamed of another boy. The priest assigns penance, Hail Marys, days of fasting, self-flagellation. But sometimes what begins in confession doesn't stay there. Some priests use their power to demand more. A favor, a touch, a kiss. After all, they held the keys to salvation. And for the poor, the uneducated, the desperate, their word was law. You hear of a girl no more than 13 told she must prove her purity to the priest in private. He says it's a test, a blessing, a rite. She doesn't understand, but she complies. This was not rare, and there was nowhere to report it. The church was above reproach. The priest's word was trusted over hers. If she told anyone, she might be accused of seduction, and so the cycle went on. And outside the cathedral, bells begin to toll. You slip out before the crowd gathers, before the sermon starts. You've heard enough preaching for one lifetime, and you walk now past a young couple. They've just been married. The wife's hands are trembling. The husband drinks with his friends. Tonight their union must be proven. The bedding ceremony awaits. But more than that, so does expectation, control, ownership. Because this isn't a marriage of equals, it's a transfer of rights. Her father has given her away, literally. Her body, her womb, her labor, her silence. All part of the dowry. He has the right to her body whenever he wishes. If she refuses, he may beat her. The law allows it, provided the stick is no thicker than his thumb. And if she runs, if she seeks protection, good luck. The law belongs to him. The church will send her back. Her family will disown her. Her children, if she has any, will be his. You keep walking. Past the church, past the manor, into the woods. Because this world isn't just cruel, it's inescapable. It's everywhere, in every home, every law, every whispered joke, every doctrine disguised as protection, and you've barely scratched the surface. The woods close around you now, their branches clawing at the sky like ink-dipped quills. The air smells of wet earth and wood smoke, but also something older, something sour. The further you walk, the quieter it gets. No more street vendors, no church bells, just the soft crunch of leaves beneath your boots. You're not here by accident. You're following something. A scent, a whisper, a rumor. A woman lives in these woods. They call her the Green Widow, or sometimes the one who never married. A crone, they say. A witch, maybe. But really she's just a midwife. A healer. A woman who chose to live alone beyond the reach of husband or priest, which in the medieval mind makes her suspicious by default. You reach her cottage half swallowed by ivy, its chimney coiling smoke into the evening. She knows you're there before you knock. And when the door creaks open, she stares at you without fear. You ask her why she lives alone. She just smiles. Because here beyond the edge of the village, she doesn't have to answer to men, doesn't have to kneel in church or endure the marriage bed or pretend not to understand her own body. She's been called a seductress, a demon, a barren hag. She's been accused of sleeping with spirits, but she's also been sought out late at night by men pretending to be possessed, or lonely, or both. And sometimes she lets them in, because celibacy was rarely what it seemed. The church might preach abstinence, but desire didn't vanish in the woods, or in monasteries, or behind castle walls. You sit with her beside the fire as she tells you stories of the baron's daughter who came for a love charm, of the priest who asked for a draught to cure his dreams, of the merchant's wife who paid in silver to never get pregnant again. She keeps their secrets, but she knows what they all fear, that pleasure and pain live too close together, that sex in this world is never free. And as the fire crackles, you remember the world outside where freedom, especially sexual freedom, is punished. You leave the cottage and step into a different kind of isolation, a monastery. The gates shut behind you with a heavy groan. Here vows of silence stretch like iron bars. The monks rise before dawn, eat in silence, labor in prayer. They are sworn to celibacy, to discipline. But the body does not forget itself. You walk the cloisters and feel it, the tightness, the denial, the strain. They try to subdue the flesh with fasting, with prayer, with flagellation. They whip themselves until blood trickles between shoulder blades. They sleep on cold stone. But still the dreams come, the urges, the thoughts. One monk scratches images into the margins of a prayer book, tiny obscene sketches hidden among vines and angels. Another sneaks glances at the novices during bathing hours. Yet another has disappeared entirely, sent to a distant priory after being caught with a fellow brother. Celibacy for many was not a calling. It was a contract, a demand, a prison sentence. And while some embraced it sincerely, others buckled under the pressure. In private confession, monks might admit to nocturnal emissions, to impure thoughts, to mutual acts behind stone walls. Their punishments, sometimes prayer, sometimes exile, sometimes silence. And what of nuns? You remember the convent, the one from before. But now you're in another. This one wealthier. The abbess wears fine linen. She came from nobility. Many of the sisters here were not born for prayer, they were born as burdens. Too many daughters, not enough dowries. So the family paid a donation to the church, and the girl was cloistered. Her life now consists of bells, beads, and books. But desire doesn't die when the veil goes on, and neither does abuse. Some bishops visited convents not to preach, but to pray. Historical records reveal clerics who kept favorite sisters, who built secret chambers for private visits, who wrote lewd poems about heavenly nuns. The walls were thick, but not thick enough. And when one girl became pregnant, she was either hidden or punished, sometimes quietly removed, sometimes imprisoned, sometimes buried. You walk through the cloister garden and find a statue, Virgin Mary, with her hands outstretched. At her feet, a small stone plaque. No name, just a single word worn smooth, soror. Sister. You leave the convent and make your way toward the coast. The wind grows saltier, sharper. You smell fish, and something else, musk, smoke, sweat. You're approaching a port town. Here sailors stumble out of taverns, ships creak against moorings, and the women on the docks are waiting, not wives, not lovers, Workers, sex workers. Medieval port towns were notorious for their red light districts. In places like Bruges, Hamburg, or Bristol, entire streets were set aside for brothels. Licensed, taxed, patrolled. The church condemned them, but kings protected them. Why? Because soldiers and sailors needed relief. And it was better so, said the logic of the time, to direct that energy toward paid professionals than risk the corruption of decent women. You step into a tavern. It reeks of wine and sweat. A woman named Marguerite sits beside you. Her teeth are worn, her dress thin. She offers you company with a tired smile. She tells you how she started at 15. Her mother dead, her father drunk. The madam gave her food, a bed, a name. That was all it took. She's seen disease come and go, watched friends die, lost count of how many men have passed through her bed. She doesn't speak of pleasure, only survival. And across the table, a man brags to his friend, "You can buy her for a few pennies, but if she moans, it costs extra." That's how they spoke, as if performance were proof of worth. But it wasn't just men using women. Sometimes noble women ran the brothels. Sometimes they came seeking comfort or curiosity. The medieval world was more fluid than it pretended. Behind rigid doctrine, people experimented, transgressed, hid. You step outside again, the ocean mist wet on your face. And then from behind a shutter, you hear it chanting. But it's not in Latin, not sacred. You follow the sound to a small, candlelit room. Women gather around a table. They chant spells for love, for passion, for revenge. This is not church-sanctioned. It's folk magic. Erotically charged, emotionally potent. They whisper the names of men they want. They burn scraps of clothing. They tie knots into strings to bind affection. Some want husbands, others want lovers. Some want freedom from both. This is sex as magic, sex as ritual, sex as power. In a world that tried to crush female desire under law, religion, and marriage, these women carved out their own space. Secret, sacred, scandalous, and dangerous. Because if caught, they'd be branded witches. And if the spell backfired, they'd be blamed for curses, plagues, miscarriages. And still they gathered. The candles flicker. Your eyes grow heavy. You sit beside them unseen as they pass a cup of wine and murmur into the night. This isn't just about bodies. It's about control, about survival, about reclaiming what the world told them was shameful. And as the wind howls outside and the flames dance in the dark, you realize something. The customs may have been medieval, but the echoes, they're still here. Morning creeps in slow and gray, sifting through the slats of an old window and falling in tired lines across a crooked floor. You're still in that port town, but the streets are empty now. The sailors have staggered home. The brothels have bolted their doors. You wander through the silence like a ghost, stepping carefully past. Broken jugs, muddy footprints, and the occasional red ribbon caught on a door latch like a flag left behind. After a war no one talks about. You turn a corner and come across something strange. A tall wooden post with a seat strapped halfway up. Iron manacles hang from its frame, and a sign is nailed crookedly beneath it. The Scold's Bridle. You walk slowly around it. This was a punishment device meant not for thieves or murderers, but for women. Specifically, women who nagged, or gossiped, or raised their voices, or challenged their husbands. The scold's bridle, also called the brank, was a metal cage fitted over the head with a plate that pressed against the tongue. In some cases, it included a spike that cut into the flesh if the woman tried to speak. You imagine it, a woman dragged into the square, locked into the bridle, forced to wear it for hours, days, sometimes paraded through the village with a bell attached to warn others of her sin, her crime of speaking. No trial, no defense, just shame. And why? Because in the medieval world, a woman's voice was a threat, especially when that voice challenged a man's authority, or accused a priest, or spoke too openly about sex. Speech like sex was supposed to be passive, quiet, obedient. You turn away from the bridle and make your way toward the edge of the town, where stone gives way to dirt paths. You pass a group of children playing with sticks. One of them chants a rhyme, "Ride a cock horse to Banbury Cross, to see a fine lady upon a white horse." You've heard it before. But here in this context, it doesn't sound innocent. Because many nursery rhymes, if you peel back the layers, hide deeper meanings, often sexual, often violent, often cautionary. Warnings dressed up as lullabies. Parables in rhyme. Georgie Porgy kissed the girls and made them cry. Because Georgie had power, and the girls had none. When the boys came out to play, Georgie Porgy ran away. The songs taught children what society expected, what men could get away with, what women should fear. You leave the children behind and follow the dirt road toward the hills. Up here, above the noise, the world feels older. The ruins of a Roman wall crumble beside you, and suddenly you're in a graveyard. But not just any graveyard. This one lies outside the church fence, unmarked, untended. These are the graves of the excommunicated, the executed, the unwanted. Suicides, heretics, prostitutes, women who died in childbirth and weren't deemed pure enough for holy ground, infants born out of wedlock, lovers who died together but weren't allowed to rest side by side. No names, just stones. You kneel beside one of them, brush away moss, and you remember death wasn't the end of judgment in the Middle Ages. Your sexual history followed you into the afterlife, or so they believed. Dying with mortal sin on your soul meant eternal damnation. And for women especially, those sins were almost always tied to sex. If a woman gave birth without being married, she might be denied a Christian burial. If she died during an abortion, secret illegal whispered between hands, her soul was considered forfeit. The church didn't pray for her. Her name was forgotten, her grave unblessed. And so even in death, the body remained political, sexualized, judged. You walk between the stones and feel its centuries of silence. Then a wind picks up and you hear a song carried through the trees. It's not a hymn. It's a carol, a round dance song sung by young men and women in spring, joyful on the surface, but the lyrics often shockingly erotic. You step into the memory of a May Day celebration, villagers dancing around a maypole, ribbons flutter. The air smells of flowers and sweat. And as the dance goes on, the mood shifts. The lyrics grow bolder. The touches linger. Hands slip beneath sleeves. May Day was the one day when the rules bent a little. When lust was half celebrated, half feared. Couples would sneak into the woods. Babies born 9 months later were often winked at, not punished. Even the church struggled to contain the wildness of May. Because for all its control, the medieval world couldn't erase nature. So it tried to shape it. You walk past another celebration now, a fertility ritual. A woman crowned with flowers. A man in stag horns. The villagers chant. They pour wine on the earth. They dance in spirals. Somewhere in the ceremony, symbolic or not so symbolic, acts of intercourse are performed. Pagan customs, yes. But they survived adapted, folded into Christian festivals, twisted into morality plays, sanitized for mass. But the root was always there, sex as power, sex as chaos, sex as the force that brought life and destroyed order. You move through the crowd invisible, past revelers, past watchers, past the priest scowling from the edge, unsure whether to condemn or quietly tolerate what he sees. And then you hear the whispers again. This time from behind monastery walls. You step back into the cloister, this one far richer than before. The abbey is full of relics, splinters of saints' bones, veils of martyrs, phials of breast milk said to come from the Virgin herself. But not all relics are holy. You find a hidden drawer in the abbot's private chamber, inside a book. Its cover is worn, its title in Latin Speculum Concupiscentiae, the mirror of desire. It's not a prayer book. It's erotic literature, handwritten and illuminated. Page after page of explicit stories, tales of noblewomen seducing stable boys, of priests caught in scandalous liaisons, of women punished for wanting too much, of men who wanted everything. These texts circulated quietly among elites, copied in scriptoria hidden in libraries. Some were cautionary tales. Others were just stories, fantasies, outlets for urges that had nowhere else to go. Desire wasn't absent in the medieval mind. It was everywhere, but always veiled, punished, feared. You close the book and move on, down corridors, through time, until you reach a courtroom again. A man stands trial not for theft, not for murder, but for impotence. His wife has accused him, claims their marriage was never consummated, that she's still a virgin. The judge demands proof. The man is examined, forced to demonstrate arousal, sometimes in front of witnesses, sometimes with the help of midwives. If he fails, the marriage is annulled, his reputation destroyed. Sex was a legal requirement, a proof of masculinity, of dominance. And to fail at it even once was humiliation beyond measure. And the woman, she walks free. But not truly, because rumors cling. If she remarries quickly, she's accused of manipulation. If she doesn't, she's whispered to be cursed. No one wins in these courts. Everyone bleeds one way or another. You leave the courtroom exhausted, back into the woods, the fields, the night, and you realize this wasn't just about sex. It was about systems. Systems that dictated who could touch, who could speak, who could live without fear. Systems still echoing now. The night stretches out before you again, velvet black and damp with dew. The world has quieted, but your thoughts churn like the river you now follow, slow, cold, cutting through the landscape like history itself. You trace the edge of the water, listening to the way it laps against stone. Something about the sound feels ancient. And then you notice the figures moving just ahead. 2 people, barefoot, hands bound together by a braided cord. It's a trial, not by jury, not by evidence, by ordeal. The villagers watch from the bank as the priest recites the words. The accused are to be tested by water. One has been charged with fornication, premarital sex. the other with adultery. Maybe both are true, maybe neither. But the church has decided they must prove their innocence through the judgment of God. Their hands are tied, their bodies thrown into the river. If they float, they are guilty, rejected by the purity of the water. If they sink, they are innocent, but likely dead. You stand frozen as the crowd murmurs. No one intervenes. Some cross themselves, some smirk. This was justice medieval style, where bodies were tested like objects and survival wasn't always the goal. You keep walking. The river leads you to a village still slumbering. You duck beneath a low doorway into a farmhouse kitchen where something hangs above the hearth, a charm, woven with thread feathers and tiny bones. Not just decoration, a ward, a spell. This household believes in more than saints. It believes in old protections, especially for women, because here pregnancy can kill. Childbirth is not sacred. It is feared. Feared like a curse. Feared like war. You climb the stairs, careful not to wake the sleeping children in the loft, and enter a small room where a woman writhes in labor. The midwife kneels beside her. Candles flicker. A basin of water steams nearby. You watch silently as hours pass. There is no anesthesia, no comfort, just whispered prayers and clenched jaws. The woman bites a leather strap to stop from screaming. The midwife murmurs words you don't understand, half prayer, half incantation. And when the baby comes slick and silent, the midwife waits. 1 breath, 2, then the cry. Relief washes over the room. But you've seen too much to believe in happy endings. The mother may bleed, may never stop. If the baby dies, she may be blamed. If the baby lives and she does not, the villagers will nod and say God's will. And if it's a girl, a pause, a flicker of disappointment. Because girls are costly. Girls must be protected, watched, married off, punished if they stray. And so from the very first breath, sex already shapes her destiny. You descend the stairs, leaving the mother to rest, and find a boy crouched by the hearth, carving something into the dirt with a stick. He's singing to himself. A rhyme again. If she's red and ripe with blush, she's ready for the milking hush. You freeze. He doesn't know what it means. Not really. But the rhyme has passed from mouth to mouth, from farm to field, from century to century. A way to describe a girl reaching puberty. A signal, a warning, a threat. You step outside. You need air. And then you hear the clanging of metal. It's coming from the blacksmith's forge. You approach cautiously. Inside, the smith works with sweat rolling down his arms, hammering iron into rings, bars, clasps. But one item set aside chills you more than fire ever could. A chastity belt. It lies on the table like a joke no one should laugh at. Wrought iron. Heavy. Studded with spikes in places you'd rather not look. Most scholars now agree that they were rare, possibly symbolic. Some made centuries later for display, not use. But that doesn't mean the fear behind them wasn't real. They represent the medieval obsession with female purity. The fantasy that women's bodies could be locked, secured, hidden from temptation and from themselves. You touch the cold metal. It's absurd. But the message is clear. Control the body, control the woman. And not just in the physical sense. You walk now to a scriptorium where a friar dips his pen into ink and begins copying a text. It's a guide for confessors, a list of sins, an instruction manual for interrogating souls. You read over his shoulder, ask the penitent if he has lain with a woman not his wife. Ask how often. Ask in what manner. Ask whether from the front or behind. Ask if he spilled seed where no life could form. Ask if she cried out, if she enjoyed it. The list goes on. Detailed, perverse, voyeuristic under the veil of virtue. You realize confession was never just about forgiveness. It was about control, about documenting desire, about policing bodies through guilt and repetition. And while some priests truly sought to heal, others used the booth as a place to satisfy their own curiosity. Or worse. You exit the scriptorium into a marketplace. Loud, bustling. The smells of spices, dung, sweat, and perfume hit you at once. But amid the stalls, you notice something strange. A woman being tested. Not for sickness, for honesty. She's been accused of being unfaithful, and to prove her chastity, she must walk barefoot across hot coals. If her feet remain unburned, she is innocent. If they blister, she is guilty. She cries, she prays, she walks. The crowd watches. When she collapses, a murmur rises, witch, slut, liar. The town priest nods satisfied. Another kind of trial, another kind of punishment. And just behind her, a man laughs. He's been caught with 3 women in the same month. He paid a fine and walked away whistling, because his sin was seen as strength, hers as shame. You can feel it now, thick in the air, the double standard, the weight of it. And yet, despite it all, people still sought intimacy, still risked everything for a touch, a glance. A stolen night behind closed shutters. You walk past a stone wall where initials are carved A, M, G plus U. Some with hearts, some with crosses. Lovers in secret. Maybe still alive. Maybe long buried. You smile faintly. Because even in this dark world, love still flickered. Quiet. Brave. But make no mistake, it was never safe. You turn the corner and hear a voice reading aloud. A poem. He kissed me sweet beneath the yew, but when my belly bloomed and grew, he vanished like the morning dew, and they called me beast, not bride. A girl sits alone repeating the verses like a rosary. She's memorized them. Maybe she lived them. Maybe her mother did. The poem isn't in any book. It lives on lips, in lullabies and warnings, a record of sorrow carried across generations. You sit beside her for a moment, not speaking. And as the stars bloom in the sky above you, understand something deeper than all the scrolls, all the court records, all the penances ever written. Medieval sex was not just about desire. It was about punishment, property, power. But it was also about resistance, longing, the quiet, dangerous act of wanting more. The night deepens, and with it the hush of forgotten things. You've walked so far now, the world behind you has blurred into myth. Only the cold facts remain. Somewhere in your bones you feel the centuries, the weight of them, the stifled gasps, the hidden bruises, the careful silences. And yet ahead the path still stretches on. You find yourself in a stone passageway, narrow, claustrophobic. The kind built not for walking, but for watching. This is a castle's private corridor, a whispering gallery used by servants to move unseen, and by noblemen to spy. You stop peering through a small hole in the wall. What you see is a bedchamber rich with drapery candlelight flickering off gilded paneling. A young woman paces the floor, alone. She's dressed in white, but the white means nothing. Not purity, not peace. Tonight her marriage is to be completed, not celebrated, not chosen. Her husband is an older nobleman, possibly twice her age. She's his fourth wife. His previous ones died in childbirth or just disappeared. You can see it on her face, she's heard the stories. Outside her chamber door, women wait. A few will walk her to the bed. A few will stay to witness the bedding. Some traditions demanded proof after all. A stained sheet. A scream. A priest to bless the consummation. A servant to report what she hears. You turn away. You've seen enough. Back in the corridor, you press your hand to the stone. It's cold, unyielding, just like the law. Because under medieval law, once a woman married her husband, owned her body. She could not say no. She could not withdraw consent because consent was no longer hers to give. The term marital rape didn't exist. Not in their language, not in their logic. What happened in the marriage bed was private, untouchable, even by the courts. You pass another peephole, another chamber. This one shows a nobleman with a servant girl. She's still in her apron, her face turned away. He doesn't hit her, he doesn't yell. But her stillness is louder than any scream. You know she didn't say yes. She never had to. Because class was power too. In a world stratified by blood, wealth, and gender, there were no equal encounters. If a lord approached a milkmaid, it wasn't flirtation, it was expectation. If a priest praised a widow's beauty, she wasn't being complimented, she was being tested. And if she refused, well, it depended on who was watching. You step out into the great hall where nobles feast and drink and laughter echoes against stone. But beneath the mirth is something darker, a wager. You hear it clearly. One noble boasting that he can seduce the baker's daughter, another claiming he'll take her first. The stakes gold, a hunting falcon, a barrel of mead. And just like that, a woman becomes a game. A conquest, a currency. This wasn't confined to taverns or hunting lodges. It happened in courts and palaces, in papal chambers and royal tents. Desire was dressed up in poetry and chivalry, but behind the sonnets and roses were politics, alliances, scandals. You think of the court of Eleanor of Aquitaine, where troubadours sang of courtly love. Songs that spoke of aching hearts and noble longing, but real love, the kind that defied marriage contracts or crossed class lines, was dangerous. In the stories, Lancelot loves Guinevere. Tristan dies for Isolde, but those were tales. In truth, adulterous love could get you whipped, branded, imprisoned, or killed. And yet people still loved, secretly. Desperately. You follow the music, now lute and lyre soft and sorrowful. It leads you to a side chamber where a noblewoman sits writing by candlelight. Her hair is loose. Her ink is almost gone. She's composing a poem. Not for her husband, but for a woman. A companion. A friend, they'd say. But the poem says more. It speaks of lips like wine, of hands that tremble at touch of nights spent in whispered confession. Lesbianism in the Middle Ages was rarely named, but it existed. Women wrote of each other, loved each other, touched in ways soft and secret. The church for a time didn't quite know what to do with it. Male-male relations were explicitly condemned as sodomy. But some theologians argued that since women lacked the organ to penetrate, they couldn't sin in the same way. Others disagreed. Penitentials eventually listed punishments, floggings, excommunications, years of penance. But many women loved in silence, in convents, in corners, in letters never sent. You watch her seal the parchment, then hide it beneath a floorboard. Another story erased before it could be told. You step back into the hallway, heart aching, and then laughter. Rough raucous spilling from the kitchens below. The servants are off duty now. They drink from wooden cups and share stories, some bawdy, some tragic. One woman recounts how the stable boy was caught with the cook's son. The boys were whipped and made to sleep in the stables for a week. The others laugh, but it's not cruel. Not entirely. There's a shared understanding here of danger, of need, of the secret places desire carves when it has nowhere safe to go. Another servant jokes about milkmaids with nimble hands. A third teases a girl about her trysts behind the hayloft. They tease, yes, but behind the teasing is fear. Because all of them know one wrong word, one jealous rival, one angry master, and what was once a flirtation becomes a crime. Even among the poor, sex could ruin you. You walk back up the stairs now, back toward the rooms where power lives. In one, a physician prepares a remedy. His patient is a man wealthy, middle-aged, pale, complaining of impotence. The doctor trained in Galenic medicine believes the man's humors are unbalanced. He prescribes a potion of saffron, crushed deer antler, and powdered beetle. He also suggests intercourse with a virgin. The younger the better. The fire of her untouched body, he says, will restore the heat to yours. It's not a metaphor. This advice was real, dangerous, common, and it led to horror. Rich men sometimes sought out young girls, not just for pleasure, but for perceived healing. A belief rooted in fear of aging, of impotence, of death. The younger the girl, the stronger the magic, they claimed. And no one asked the girls. You turn away. Back down the corridor. Back into the night. The castle gates creak open, and you slip out unseen. As you walk through the courtyard, you notice a statue, Saint Agnes, the patron of virgins. She's always shone with a lamb, soft, silent, but you wonder if she ever screamed. You keep walking. You pass a wall where someone has carved another poem. They burned my body for being too warm, but never asked who lit the flame. The stone beneath your hand feels warm despite the chill in the air. These voices never left. They were just buried. But tonight, you found them again. And they are not quiet. Dawn stains the sky with ash-pink light, but there's no warmth in it. Not yet. You've wandered all night through whispers and walls, through chapels and brothels and bloodied sheets. And now, as the first light rises over frost-bitten fields, you step into another kind of enclosure, not a home, not a church, but a prison. It doesn't look like much, just a stone building with rusted hinges and straw for floors, but inside history sits heavy on every wall. You duck through the door. The air smells of mildew and secrets. There's a cell to your left. Inside a woman, not a thief, not a murderer, a fornicator. That's the word the warden spat as he locked her in. Her crime sleeping with a man, not her husband. Never mind that the man was a nobleman. Never mind that he promised to marry her. Never mind that he swore he loved her until the moment he didn't. Now she waits here for trial, or for a priest, or for her belly to show. Whichever comes first. You kneel beside the bars. She won't speak, but her eyes tell the whole story. She's not the only one. Down the corridor, another cell holds a boy no older than 15. His crime, masturbation. They caught him in the stables. Said he was sinning against nature. Said he was wasting seed. The penitential books call it onanism, and they prescribe brutal penances, 30 days of fasting, bare knees on stone lashes on the back. And yet, the body doesn't stop wanting. Not here, not ever. You move past the cells deeper into the prison and find a locked trunk. Inside confiscated items, rosaries, ribbons, scribbled letters. And beneath them, a book with no title. You open it. It's a ledger. Pages filled with names and offenses. But as you read, the tone changes. The margins fill with notes in a different hand, smaller, softer. It's the writing of a jailer. A woman, maybe. She writes what the charges don't say. Anne, pregnant by the steward, denies it. Whispered that he threatened her with loss of her father's land. Madeline burned for witchcraft. Her only crime tending to a girl who bled too soon. Johanna refused marriage. Said she'd rather take holy orders. Laughed in court. Judge called her unnatural. These were not just prisoners. These were women who disobeyed the sexual script. And for that they were locked up. Or worse, You close the book gently and step back into the sun. And suddenly the village is stirring. Chickens scream, buckets clank. And above the rooftops, the church bell tolls once, twice, calling the faithful to Mass. You follow the crowd. It's Sunday, the only day where silence is sacred. Inside the stone church, you settle into the back pew out of sight. The priest begins the sermon. Today's topic. You know what's coming. You've heard it in dozens of voices in dozens of towns. Eve, the first temptress. Eve, who brought sin into the world. Eve, who used her body to destroy paradise. The message is clear: women bring danger through desire. Their beauty is a weapon. Their touch is a trap. Even now, in the eyes of God, they must be watched. The priest says, women must cover their hair, walk behind their husbands, guard their modesty. He reminds them that their virtue is their value, and once lost, it cannot be restored. He doesn't mention the men who take it. You leave the church before the bread and wine. You've lost your appetite for sanctity. Out in the churchyard, a girl kneels by a grave. She places a single stone on the mound. Not flowers, not a cross, just a small stone worn smooth by fingers. You ask who it was. She says nothing, but the way she stares at the church door tells you everything. You leave her in silence and return to the fields. Beyond the edge of town, you hear music pipes, tambourine, the steady stomp of feet. You approach a gathering, a marriage feast. But something feels off. The bride is quiet, her smile painted, her hands clutching a bouquet like a shield. The groom laughs too loud, drinks too fast. He boasts that he won her fair in court, that her father owed him a debt, and she was the payment. Bride prices, dowries, land exchanges. These weren't metaphors. They were marriage. Women were bartered like sheep or silver, especially among the lower classes, where land was scarce and mouths were many. A man might win a bride by force, by favor, or by fraud. And once she was his, she was his. You watch as they're led to the bridal chamber. There's no bedding ceremony here, just a door that closes and a girl who doesn't close her eyes. This wasn't uncommon. Marriage by capture was practiced across Europe, sometimes ritualized, sometimes very real. A man could kidnap a woman, force a priest to bless the union, and claim her as his wife. If she was no longer a virgin afterward, few would take her back. Her family might accept the marriage just to save face. And so the law, always so eager to punish women for sexual deviance, looked the other way when men committed it with rings. You leave the wedding in silence, boots damp with grass and shame. A little farther down the road, you come across a group of young boys carving something into a tree. You move closer and see the shape forming a crude picture of a woman's body. Beneath it, words. Filthy ones. You ask where they learned them. One shrugs. My brother, he says. He works at the mill. You realize then that sex education, such as it was, came from the street, from jokes, from threats, from older boys bragging about girls they touched, from tavern songs and whispered rhymes. Girls learned from older women, from bloodstains, from slaps, from midwives who whispered the truth after the damage was done. No one learned with care or consent. You keep walking until the path turns to stone again. And there it is, another town, another shadow. This one has a public whipping post. A man is tied to it, shirtless, back red and raw. His crime, homosexuality. No trial this time. The townspeople heard rumors caught him in the company of a traveling musician. That was enough. The priest gave the order. The lash did the rest. And when he's cut down, no one speaks to him. He limps away like a ghost. You step into the alley behind the post and find the wall covered in graffiti. Not Latin. Not prayers. Just initials. Dates. Symbols. A secret record. Love carved in code. Bodies remembered in silence. You press your fingers to the stone, and somewhere far off you hear it again. They touched me in the dark, and I forgot my shame, until the sun rose and I was burned for the flame. The poem is older than memory, but the pain in it is fresh, and you are not done walking yet. The wind shifts as you leave that alley sharp, now tasting faintly of iron and wood smoke. Your steps take you uphill through a winding track littered with roots and hoof prints until you reach a place where the sky opens wide. A scaffold stands at the crest. Not a gallows this time. A platform. A crowd gathers below their voices, a low, simmering boil. You move closer. Two people stand on the platform, a man and a woman. Stripped to the waist, bound wrist to wrist, back to back. A sign hangs around the man's neck, lecher. Around the woman's whore. Their crime being caught together. Not in love, not in violence, just together, behind a stable, at night. Someone saw them. Someone told. You watch as the town official reads from a parchment, their names, their sin, their sentence. A week of public display. Whipping on alternate days. Bread and water only. After that, they'll be branded. The man on the chest, the woman on the thigh. She cries out when the whip lands. He bites his lip. No one helps. These punishments weren't designed just to hurt. They were meant to stain, to linger. To turn sex into shame you could never wash off. Even when the bruises faded, the memory wouldn't. You walk away before the blood hits the boards. Down the hill, the town fades behind you. The trees close in again, and now you find yourself in a glade where a dozen young girls gather in secret. They sit in a circle, whispering, giggling nervously. One holds a candle, another a scrap of mirror. They're playing a game, something they learned from older sisters or wandering minstrels, a superstition. If you stare into a mirror by candlelight on a full moon, they say you'll see your future husband. They laugh, but not without fear, because what they don't say, what everyone knows, is that your husband may not be the one you want. He may be older, cruel, indifferent, or worse. Still they play, because hope is the only magic left to them. You sit nearby unseen. One girl leans close to her friend and whispers, "My mother said it doesn't hurt if you love him." Her friend frowns. "My aunt said it always hurts." And the circle goes quiet. They are 12, maybe 13, old enough to bleed, old enough to marry, but no one's ever told them what that really means. So they sit in the dark, guessing, inventing, sharing pieces of myths. And when the candle burns low, they scatter like birds. You remain behind, watching the smoke coil up into the night sky. Eventually, you follow the path back into another village. This one smaller, simpler, but not safer. You pass the home of a midwife, a different one than before. Her windows are shuttered. Her door has been painted with ash. A warning. Inside, she sits at the hearth, hands trembling. She's just been accused of devilish craft. The evidence: a girl died under her care after childbirth. The priest claims the girl's soul is lost. The village whispers that the child was born with a mark, a stain on his neck, and that no baptism was performed. They say the midwife is cursed, that she took the girl's virtue, that she drinks the blood of newborns. None of it's true. But truth doesn't matter. Not here. You see the tools of her trade scattered across the floor: herbs for pain stones, for heat scraps of linen. Things that once brought life now threaten hers. They will come for her by morning. She knows it. And so do you. You leave her in the dark, heart heavy. Not far from her house stands another kind of structure, an old mill half-rotted, but still functional. And behind it, a row of stones with names half-carved, half-erased. Here lie the fallen, women who died in childbirth outside of marriage, women who refused marriage, women accused of tempting too many men, or one powerful man, or no one at all. Their stories don't exist in court records, only in rumor, in warning. You step carefully between the stones, each one heavier than its weight. At the edge of the graveyard, someone has etched words into the wood of the fence. She smiled too long. She danced too free. Now she sleeps beneath the tree. You press your palm to the carving. The tree beside it, tall, wide, half-dead, leans into the fence as though listening. You walk on. Ahead you find a small chapel, not church-owned, just maintained, barely. Inside, faded frescoes line the walls. One shows Adam and Eve, their bodies wrapped in vines. Another shows Mary, arms, open eyes, sorrowful. But in the corner, hidden behind a curtain, is something unexpected, a fresco of Lilith. She's depicted with long black hair, wings curled around her bare shoulders, eyes defiant, body unapologetically nude. Her expression neither shameful nor seductive, just free. You stare at her for a long time. Lilith, the first woman according to some Jewish traditions, cast out of Eden not because she sinned, but because she refused to submit. She would not lie beneath Adam, would not call him master, and so she was replaced with Eve. The medieval church called Lilith a demon, said she stole infants, said she rode men in their sleep. But some women saw something else, not evil, but resistance. This fresco, it must have been painted in secret, preserved by silence, protected by someone brave. You light a candle beneath it and whisper a thank you. Outside the chapel, the sky has darkened again. Clouds moving in fast. A storm threatens, but you keep walking. Past the old Roman roads, past the hedges heavy with dew, you find a traveler's inn at the crossroads. Inside, the fire crackles and ale foams over wooden mugs. Men boast and bellow. A bard tunes his lyre and begins a tale. But not of knights. He sings of a girl who outwitted 3 suitors, who kept her land and her virtue, who rode into battle dressed as a man, who kissed a queen and never apologized. The innkeeper rolls his eyes. Some men jeer, but a few listen. Really listen. Because even here in this world of rules and ruined stories can still rebel. You sit by the fire and watch a woman pull her hood lower. She's smiling. Maybe she sees herself in the tale. Maybe she is the tale. Either way, the song plays on, and for a moment there's warmth. But outside, the wind howls again, and your journey isn't over. The storm breaks as you leave the inn first, a warning gust, then rain thick and cold falling in sheets. It clings to your cloak, seeps into your boots, turns the road to muck. But you keep walking. There's nowhere else to go. Not yet. You follow the path down into a hollow, where the earth smells ancient, sodden with centuries. Trees bend like witnesses, their branches heavy with secrets. And just ahead, through the mist, you see it a small schoolhouse long abandoned. The roof sags, the windows gape like open mouths. You push the door open. Inside, the walls are covered in chalked prayers and Latin phrases. A forgotten lesson. A lesson no one finished. In the corner sits a bench. A boy once sat there. Maybe 12. Maybe younger. He was caught reading something behind the priest's back. A manuscript. Not scripture. A poem. You find the pages beneath the floorboards wrapped in oilskin. They're smudged, half illegible, but you can still read some lines. The shepherd boy kissed me once behind the well. His mouth tasted of blackberries and fear. We said nothing, but everything burned. He was beaten for this. Called unnatural. Perverted. Made to fast for 40 days. Forbidden from speaking to other boys. Forbidden from looking. Forbidden from feeling. In some places, they would have stoned him. In others, sent him to the monastery, where his body could be erased through penance, where his desires could be scoured by cold water and colder words. You fold the pages and place them back, because even this forgotten boy deserves to be remembered. You leave the school and climb a ridge where the land flattens. Here the wind rushes like a confession, and ahead across a field lit by flickering torchlight, you see a procession. Not a parade, not a wedding, a punishment. You creep closer. A young woman is being marched through the field with a yoke around her neck, heavy wood stretching her arms wide. Her dress is torn, her hair shorn. Someone throws a cabbage. Someone else spits. She's been convicted of seduction. They say she tempted a monk. They say she bewitched him with her eyes. They say she must be punished to purify the church. But the monk, he was sent to another town, promoted. She meanwhile is forced to wear the yoke for 3 days and nights. In rain, in hunger, in shame. If she removes it, she'll be whipped. If she survives, she'll be shunned. If she dies, they'll call it penance. You watch her stumble. No one helps her up. You wonder how many others have walked this same path, carrying not wood, but the weight of accusation. You walk beside her invisible. And when she finally collapses in the mud, you kneel at her side. There is no comfort, only presence. But sometimes that's enough. When the procession disappears over the hill, you turn east toward a manor rising from the fog like a scar. The gates are rusted, the banners faded. But this place once mattered. Inside, tapestries still hang, gold thread turned to dust. The dining hall lies empty, but you feel echoes in the stone. This is where the Lord's right was invoked. You've heard the term droit du Seigneur, the supposed right of a noble to sleep with a commoner's bride on her wedding night. Scholars argue whether it was real or ritualized, but whether fact or myth, the fear was real. Some lords demanded first fruits. Others required bedding taxes, payments to prove a marriage had not been touched by anyone of rank. In some villages, grooms gave their brides to the manor for one night, not because they believed in the custom, but because they were too poor to risk saying no. You imagine the scene: a young couple married by candlelight, taken straight to the Lord's keep. The bride led away while the groom is held back. Just one night, they say. It's tradition. And when she returns, pale and silent, there is no complaint, no outrage, because to protest is to invite ruin. You walk through the manor past bedrooms that smell of damp velvet, past wardrobes filled with moth-eaten silks, and you find a trunk. Inside, a bundle of letters. They're all the same, written by women, some begging for their husbands to be released from debt, others pleading for mercy. He did not know she was noble, my lord. One simply says, "Please don't send for my daughter." Each is signed with trembling ink, some with names, others with only crosses, and none, as far as you can tell, were ever answered. You close the trunk. Upstairs, a nursery sits untouched. Wooden toys, a doll, a small slipper beneath the bed. You think about the children born from those traditions. How many were passed off as legitimate? How many were raised by men who never knew or never wanted to know the truth? Downstairs, the fire has long gone cold. You leave the manor and walk along the riverbank. The rain has stopped. Mist curls over the water like breath. And ahead you see another figure, a man in rags kneeling at the edge of the river. He's carving something into the mud with a stick, a word. You get closer. He's writing "forgive" over and over. Just that one word. You sit beside him, but he doesn't see you. His eyes are far away, maybe lost, maybe remembering. He speaks finally. "I wanted to wait until we were married, but they said she was already stained, that she wasn't worth it, that she must have given herself away." He pauses. "I never asked her." Then silence. He drops the stick. walks into the mist, and disappears. You remain by the river a while longer, letting the silence settle over you. It's not clean silence, not holy. It's the kind that hums with all the things never said, all the apologies never spoken, all the names never remembered. The water laps against the bank patient, as if waiting for someone to come wash it all away. But the stains remain, even in dreams. You rise from the riverbank slowly, your knees damp, your fingers cold. The stick the man left behind is half buried in the mud, now the word forgive slowly erased by the tide. The sky has lightened, though you can't tell whether it's morning or simply the storm fading. The light here never feels kind. It exposes more than it warms. You walk inland again, drawn now to the sound of metal, striking metal, sharp, deliberate, methodical. The clang echoes off stone and you follow it into the shadow of a town you haven't seen before. Not new, just different. This is a place ruled by order, punishment, record. You pass under a stone archway carved with words in Latin. Above it, a crest, a balance scale held by a blindfolded woman. A lie. Justice here sees everything, and it favors the strong. The clang leads you to a workshop behind the courthouse. A man is sharpening knives, not for cooking, for law. You see his tools branding irons shaped like letters. W for whore, T for thief, B for blasphemer. Each one forged to mark flesh permanently. A woman enters the workshop. She's thin, young. Her head is bowed. She doesn't speak. She's here for her sentence, one brand above her breast. A permanent confession to a crime she didn't commit. The magistrate said she was found in the woods with 2 men. There were no witnesses, just gossip, just anger, just a powerful man who needed a scapegoat. And now for the rest of her life, every time someone sees that scar, they'll know what she was accused of. You try to look away. You can't. She doesn't scream. Not because it doesn't hurt, but because she knows it's useless. Later, she will be released, not forgiven, not exonerated, just released. She will never find honest work. She will never marry. She will sleep in barns or beside roads. And if she's caught again, the sentence will be doubled, branded again, or worse. You leave the workshop, your ears still ringing. In the next building, you find the record hall. Scrolls line the walls, cases filled with inked ledgers, names, fines, punishments. You run your hand along the spines. Every one of them, someone's story. Every one of them, a judgment. You pull one out at random. Margaret of the South End fined 2 silver for walking alone after dark without male company. Agnes, the baker's daughter, confessed to carnal thoughts about a neighbor's son ordered to fast for 10 days. Joan of the Lower Street caught swearing during intercourse prescribed whipping and public repentance. And there, in different ink, another note. She bled out before punishment could be delivered. The record ends. No remorse. No question. You put the scroll back. On your way out, you pass a mirror, rare, cracked, expensive. You catch your reflection for the first time in hours. You look older, as if the dust of the centuries has settled into your skin. You keep walking. Beyond the courthouse, beyond the stone and structure, the land opens up again into fields. Wide and flat, with nothing to break the sky. In the middle of one, a small wooden structure stands alone. A hut, a place of isolation. This is where they sent women with unclean bodies. If you bled too long, if your labor failed, if your lover left you with child, this is where you went. Not for care, for distance. Purgatory huts, they were called in some places. Bleeding tents in others. Officially, they were for safety. But in truth, they were for shame. You enter the hut. It stinks of rot and herbs. The straw is filthy. There's a single bowl for water. No blankets. No prayers. You find a scrap of parchment beneath a loose board. A note, day 3. The blood won't stop. They said this is my punishment. I tried to love someone. I did. You leave the hut with your fists clenched, because love was the most dangerous crime of all. Love without permission, without contract, without ownership. Back on the road, you pass a woman pulling a cart behind her. It creaks with the weight of something covered in cloth. You offer to help, she declines. Her voice is hoarse. You ask what she carries. Shame, she says, then smiles as if it were a joke, but she means it. Because this cart contains everything she wasn't allowed to keep a child's blanket. A pair of shoes, a scrap of lace, a diary. She's leaving town. Again. Driven out. This time someone found her writing poems, erotic ones. She didn't sell her body. She sold her words. They said it was worse. You walk with her a while. She tells you one of her verses. He touched me where I hid my sins, beneath the cloth, beneath the pins. I did not ask, I did not run, but now they say the devil's won. She smiles after she says it, but her eyes do not. You leave her at the crossroads. She turns south. You turn north. And soon you arrive at a village celebration. Music, dancing, children chasing each other in rings. A maypole, though it's not May. The people are trying to pretend, to escape. But even here the rules don't rest. You watch a boy and girl sneak off behind the ale tent. Nothing happens. Just a laugh, a stolen glance, a kiss on the cheek. But someone saw. The girl is dragged back by her arm. Her mother slaps her. Her father shouts. The priest begins his sermon anew. The boy, sent home with a warning. The girl, promised to a man by week's end. A cousin, a tradesman twice her age. The lesson is swift and brutal desire without permission will be crushed. It doesn't matter if it was innocent. It doesn't matter if it was wanted. It matters only that it wasn't controlled. You leave before the feast ends. You follow the lanterns lighting the edge of the forest. There you see a group of women in red cloaks. You step closer. It's not a ritual, not a secret circle, just a gathering. Survivors, wives, widows, prostitutes, all of them have stories. None of them speak them aloud. But one takes your hand. She shows you a necklace, wooden beads painted black. For every time I said yes when I meant no, you count them. There are 37. She lets go and walks back into the dark. You stay where you are, the beads heavy in your mind. Somewhere behind you, a child begins to cry. And somewhere ahead, you know another punishment waits, because this journey, like the shame it reveals, has no neat ending. Only echoes. Only wounds that time has not healed. The road narrows again, hedged by trees that press close like listening strangers. Your breath fogs as you walk, though you can't say if it's from cold or exhaustion. The silence here is heavier than any sermon. It clings to your skin, fills your ears. Every footstep feels like it might wake something ancient. And then through the hush, a familiar sound, weeping. You follow it to a small chapel crumbling at the edges, forgotten by time. Its door creaks open with a reluctant moan. Inside it's dark save for the single candle flickering on the altar. A woman kneels beneath a stained glass window. The colors have faded, but you can just make out the image Saint Mary Magdalene. She was called a sinner, a harlot, the woman Jesus saved. But the truth is, medieval preachers made her into something she never claimed to be. She was turned into a symbol of repentance, of womanhood, redeemed only through suffering, through submission, through denial. The woman praying now clutches a string of wooden beads, not a rosary, but something older. She mouths no words, but her tears say everything. You don't interrupt, because you know what she's praying for. Not forgiveness, but release. You step quietly back into the forest. Further ahead, you come to a crossroads marked by a strange statue, a man bound to a tree, eyes wide, mouth open in stone. He is naked, exposed, a reminder. This is a marker of punishment once used for male offenders of sexual crimes, but only certain kinds. If a man raped a noblewoman, he might hang. If he assaulted a servant, maybe a fine. If he was caught with another man, especially someone of equal rank, the punishment was swift, violent, humiliating. You read the inscription carved beneath his feet. He broke nature. He touched fire. And now the fire holds him. This is what they believed, that sex outside the sanctioned script was not just sin, but transgression. Against nature, against order, against God. You pass under the gaze of the statue and keep walking. Up ahead, you find a marketplace. Loud, crude, familiar. But there's something different about this one. You hear a woman's voice calling out above the din, not selling bread or herbs or cloth. She's reading, loudly, from a scroll. And they judged me for my skin, for how it flushed, for where it thinned. People slow. Some scoff, others listen. She is a poet, a protester, perhaps a fool. You edge closer and she looks at you. Did you come to hear the truth, she asks. You nod. She smiles bitterly. Too late for most, but not for all. She rolls the scroll and disappears behind the stalls. But her words linger. You walk past booths selling virginity potions, herbs to cool the blood, chastity charms carved from bone. Commerce feeding on fear, on shame, on control. A man calls out, fertility idols, guarantee a son. You pass quickly, because you know what happens when a woman bears only daughters. You find a courtyard at the market's edge. A small crowd has gathered. They're watching a boy, maybe 16, stand before a priest. His head is bowed. His hands tremble. He confessed to touching another boy. Once. A year ago. The priest reads his punishment aloud, 10